your parents can watch her.
Were you not here with me in the 70s? They are not the best watchers.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Greetings and salutations, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. Got it memorized? Now previously, I've spoke about the influence that 70s show had over its sequel series, That 90s Show. Today I'd like to follow that up by talking about all the new stuff this blast from the past provides. What's great about the new cast is that you definitely see fragments of the original crew, but they don't feel like shameless duplicates. Nor does every character feel like a picture-perfect recreation of a character from the previous show. Leia could obviously be seen as the Eric of the series, what with her similar placement in the story, near-identical mannerisms, and of course, blood relation. But she also differs enough from her father to feel distinct. She has the goofy sense of humor and awkwardness of her father. I could very easily see Eric Foreman himself delivering some of her lines in the original series. And I think like her on-screen father before her, she gives a natural likability to the character that could in the wrong hands maybe come off as irredeemably goofy, or unreasonably nerdy. Yet despite this, she doesn't share any of the same interests of her parent. And if anything, is actually a little bit put off by her father's open nerdiness. She takes after her mother Donna in terms of hobbies and style. While she does feel a lot like Eric, she doesn't just feel like a gender-swapped version of him. The characters have the same blueprint, but completely different foundations. It's like meeting a stranger who just so happens to look like somebody you know. This creates a performance that's familiar, but not too familiar. Like, it's familiar, but also, I'm not acquainted. I think you could also infer that Gwen is Leia's Hyde. You know, the cooler, out there, rebellious product of the time's best friend to her lead. The one who influences their decisions and helps them break out of their shell more. Constantly challenging their friend to take more risks and live their lives. The buddy with sage advice that is actually just sort of making it up as they go along. I like that they went with the archetype but changed everything else to make this character its own. Gwen is reminiscent of Hyde, but not completely derivative. It's not a perfect match. You're not going to hear Gwen spew conspiracy theories about cars that run on water, or start wearing shades that she decides to never take off, despite the fact that she's mostly indoors. But her presence and place in the lead's life follows the formula. Now it gets really tricky when trying to figure out who's Kelso. Because obviously, being that his son Jay is a part of the Point Place posse, you would obviously think that he's got this space covered. And in a lot of ways, he does. He sort of takes up the same role in the group. Like his father before him, he's the girl-crazy ladies' man. His stupidity never quite matches his dad's, but it at times does seem like he's actively trying. But in that same breath, you could also make the argument that Nate is actually the Michael Kelso of the group, being the over-the-top, gullible, good-hearted goof, who is typically the butt of his best friend's jokes. Much more than Michael's actual kid, he seems to really embody the same type of character of the original Kelso. I guess by extension, Nikki could be seen as this show's Jackie, being one half of the only established couple in the opening of the show, and dating someone who could be seen as the new Kelso of the series. Like Jackie, she bosses around her intellectually inferior boyfriend. Like Jackie, she's also good in school, but unlike Jackie, she's independent, motivated, and has a fondness for reading, which is pretty much the polar opposite of that original character. I guess that would make Oz the Fez of the group, but that's probably the most far off one, because Oz possesses a level of cynicism and wit that Fez in his heyday wouldn't even begin to comprehend. The characters were created not as carbon copies, but instead similar concepts that deviate away from the expectations set by the predecessors. The show uses this to its benefit as well because it gives a returning audience some sort of expectation as to how these events are going to unfold, all based on track record, making it much more interesting when something in the formula is changed or characters make decisions or do something their creative counterparts would never do, which makes it that much more shocking. If you're going into this with the expectation, well, this character's like this character and that character wouldn't do this, you're gonna find yourself sorely disappointed or at the very least, very shocked, because these characters aren't those characters. They may seem a little bit like those characters, but they are completely new characters on their own. The new cast is actually really, really good. I don't think they're fully fleshed out entirely, not even by the end of the first season, which is definitely a downside because I feel like at the end of the first season of that 70s show, that cast was 100% cemented. Whereas here, it feels like we weren't really given enough time with all of them to fully understand them. On the bright side, that does give us something to look forward to next season. The downside is, I want to know now. I think we're given just enough of an impression to have some sort of idea of who they are. I really like Leia Foreman. First off, name-wise alone, spot on. Eric is such a geek and open Star Wars fan that he would absolutely name his kid that. I hate to keep reusing the same phrase, but it feels very on brand for that character. Character-wise, I see traits and mannerisms from both parents in this performance. And because it's an amalgamation of two of the series' leads, it manages to both feel familiar and yet original in its own unique way. They cast the perfect actress for this part too, because I genuinely believe her as her parents' daughter. The actress feels natural in the part and even manages to legitimize the weirder lines that she delivers. I actually think that she's every bit as good as Topher Grace was as a series lead. She makes for a great protagonist. The fact that she doesn't have many friends and is sort of new in town allows the audience to become reintroduced to Wisconsin. It also gives the show a chance to tell a lot of different stories for the character, watching her go through a series of firsts. While mild-mannered, she still seems desperate to break out and grow up. And against her father's wishes, the Foremans give her that opportunity. But more so over, she's desperate to fit in and be liked. Having a group of friends is a new experience to her. So she's still learning basic human etiquette while acting as the proverbial fish out of water. She has all the qualities you'd hope to see in a main character, feeling more person than perfection. She's intelligent, but uneducated about the world that surrounds her. She's kind-hearted, but she's not immune to occasional selfishness. Well-meaning, but prone to making mistakes as well. As far as I'm concerned, Leia Foreman is a legacy character done right, sharing some of the DNA of her precursor, but not being identical to the Forerunner. Best friend Gwen is hard to describe. The actress brings a lot of energy to the role, but sometimes it does feel misplaced. For the most part, I think she makes the character work, but holy crap, do they give this character the most cringe-inducing lines. In the earlier episodes, the parts seem to be a little bit more overacted, but by the time the final episode comes around, it feels much more toned down and fitting. I feel like the character began to grow on her a little bit more as time went on. Regardless, I can see why Gwen and Leia would be attracted to each other. Gwen has complete freedom to be herself and she embraces it. She has a fondness for all things unpopular and different. I can totally buy into a friendship manifesting between the two, even if I don't necessarily agree with the pace that it went at. I'm having a lot of the same problems with this as I had with How I Met Your Father. The friendships formed seem really rushed in an effort to just get to the point of the plot. It sort of robs the audience of seeing actual friendships form instead of just insisting upon them. An easy fix to this, of course, is just to have the characters be friends prior to the start of the show, so that there's a history that's unseen and you're just being dropped into the middle of the story. You know, the audience is witnessing an already established friendship where said meaning is already implied. But here, I guess that would be a little bit harder considering that the Foremans are written out to not live in Point Place. What I love the most is that because we're introduced to Gwen through Leia, we're sort of seeing the character from Leia's perspective. So the impression of the character is that Gwen is cool. She's the main character that Leia wishes she could be, but is happy enough to befriend. Only to have her brother Nate late in the season express that Gwen isn't popular in school. She's not cool. She's just cool to Leia. This friendship endears me more to both characters, and I think there's a good chemistry between the two actresses playing them. Gwen and her half-brother Nate have a very love-hate relationship. Well, you know, maybe not hate. Hate's a strong word. Maybe a love-dislike relationship. They love each other because they're family, but they don't necessarily always like each other. They constantly clash, and conflict between the two seems to occur at random. But their sibling rivalry doesn't come from a place of hatred, it's just severe bickering. The two aren't beyond hugging things out and having a heartfelt moment, but they're also just as likely to have learned nothing and just default to the situation pre-solution. Nate is of course the goofy one, the walking punchline for all his friends, exhibiting a level of stupidity that you would think only possible from a Kelso. He may be a good guy, but he's not a very smart guy. His relationship with girlfriend Nikki seems to be the focus of the character, shown to always go above and beyond for her because he knows that she's out of his league and he doesn't want to lose her. Something Nikki is seemingly aware of and uses to her advantage. Nikki is probably one of, if not the most underdeveloped character of the bunch, but she's performed very well. Shockingly well, as a matter of fact, especially considering that this is this actress's big debut. She doesn't show it at all. She feels right at home. And I would even consider this to be one of the stronger performances out of the whole cast. As of right now, her main purpose in the show is to either boss around her boyfriend or act as the voice of reason. And I really hope we see further development of this character because, again, I think there's a lot of potential with this particular one. Nate and Gwen's family lived next door to the Foremans in the old Pinciati home. At the end of that 70s show, Bob sold the home and moved to Florida to open up a bait shop, while Donna was moving elsewhere to college. Gwen and Nate's mother, Sherry, kinda takes over the role from Bob of wacky neighbor, but goes about it in a completely different manner. Much like Bob, she has no boundaries and comes and goes from the Foreman residence as she pleases. But her actual character feels much more inspired by an entirely different That 70s Show character. I completely understand Kitty wanting Sherry around because in a lot of ways, she probably reminds Kitty of her own daughter Lori, whose whereabouts in the show are currently unknown. Being that her original actress passed away a couple years ago, and the recast actress wasn't exactly thought fondly of, I think it's more than likely that we're not going to see a return of this particular character. And I think in a lot of ways, Sherry is supposed to be a surrogate Lori. That's not something that ever goes spoken, but being a fan of the original show and being a viewer of this new one, I think it would make sense given the circumstances. In a lot of ways, I kind of feel like the Sherry character is an insight as to what a future for Lori would have looked like, whether she be the actual inspiration for the character or not. Lending some credence to that theory is the fact that there's a running joke with Sherry often acting and reacting to Red as if he was her father. She certainly does feel like a foster daughter to the Foremans. She also pops in and out of the show in intervals not dissimilar to how Lori did in the original series. And she's dating Fez, which Lori kinda sort of did in the original series. Outside of the comparison there is to be made there, I think Sherry is one of the most fun new additions to that time period franchise. Jay, Jackie and Kelso's son, seems to be a chip off the old block. Immediately making a pass at Leia within his first few minutes of screen time definitely does seem like a very Kelso move. While he probably has a much higher IQ than his father, he is nonetheless his father's son, at least initially. He's introduced as a straight-A student, but as time goes on they seem to incorporate more of his father's mannerisms into his performance, namely his intellectual prowess or lack thereof. Though this aspect of the character mostly goes overshadowed by Nate doing very similar shtick. While he definitely is his father's son, he isn't always. And sometimes when the character tries to follow in his father's footsteps, it feels like a child wearing their parents' clothing. It's cute, but it doesn't quite fit. I've rewatched this season several times, and the most I could say about this character is that he's smooth, or at least he thinks he is. We're never really shown it in practice. Having Jay and Leia pursue each other seems to make the most sense, and almost seems inevitable with the romantic history between these two families. Jay's father Michael actually once cheated on his mother with Leia's Aunt Lori, and those two would later date, while Leia's mother Donna once dated Jay's uncle Casey following a breakup with her father Eric. Their will they won't they is needlessly complicated when it doesn't have to be, which is both fitting for an ongoing series and also fitting for young love. Immaturity, developing brains, and lack of relationship experience complicate love even at its most simplest. I like the two together, but because the season is so much shorter than in the original series, I think their whole story thus far once again feels a little bit rushed. I don't think there was enough time given to them. There wasn't enough memorable moments between the two to really endear the audience to them entirely. Hopefully that will be worked on in the next installment, as Season 2 has already been confirmed. Lastly, there's Oz. Oz is up there with Leia for me as being one of my new favorite contributions. Oz is up there with Leia and Sherry for me as being one of my favorite new contributions. He's so different from anyone in any of the That Blank shows, so I find him to be a breath of fresh air. Bringing judgmental sarcasm to this group of friends, being the most rational, but at times being just as irrational as the rest of them. Like with Leia, I think there's an authenticity that comes through with this actor in the part. It doesn't feel like he's playing a part because I just believe everything that he says. He and Leia are my favorite characters because they feel like real people. Oz is an endless sea of sarcasm and sass. I think the character's comedic stylings are right up my alley. I don't know if you noticed, but dry humor is sort of my thing. I hope we get to see more from this character in the second season. because he does seemingly go missing in parts. I think that's a problem when you're dealing with a bigger cast of people. Sometimes people fall out of favor. And I don't know that there were too many Oz stories or big Oz moments, but I know that the moments that he was included in, I enjoyed more for his inclusion. My one gripe with the character is, he does sort of feel like a little bit of an outsider to everyone else in the gang. He's kind of the one that sticks out like a sore thumb. I buy the rest of these people being friends, but not as much with Oz. I really hope that they develop that a little bit more in the future. The characters are very well cast. I buy into this group of teens finding each other and becoming friends. And in short time, I found myself actually invested in this new water tower meetup. My one complaint, which I kind of already made, is that they don't feel fully fleshed out. I don't think as of the first 10 episodes I can reasonably say for sure that I know any of them outside of Leia and maybe Gwen. For the most part, they're very undefined. They're certainly not as established as the characters were at the end of the first season of That 70s Show. But to be fair, this season had less than half that amount of time to both act as a goodbye to the past and a hello to the present. So, I have hopes for the future. Ultimately, it leaves more for an audience to look forward to, but it does feel a little bit uneven. The season itself feels like it ended prematurely. And sure, if I wanted to take that as a commentary on how Summers felt cut short as a kid, I would say that's beautiful and brilliant. But that's not the case. And as a consumer, it didn't really give me enough time to get to know the characters. It's like just as I started to get really invested, the show ended. And speaking of how it ended, I think the way they went about closing the first season might have been a mistake. The plot twist of Leia and Nate almost hooking up does feel a little out of left field, and completely without merit. The two barely shared any screen time of note. I think the two of them actually had the least interaction out of anybody in this group. And then suddenly, they're just about to risk it all. Leia is ready to lock lips with her friend's boyfriend, best friend's brother, and love interest's best friend. And Nate is ready to cheat on his girlfriend that he loves dearly with someone that he barely knows. I feel like this might have been an error. Not too dissimilar from the high Donna-Eric love triangle from the first season of the original show. But time will tell, as this is only the starting point of a story and not an actual story itself. Still, I can't help but feel like this was sequel bait, that as of right now feels entirely unjustified. Again, time will tell. We're not seeing a finished product, we're seeing the start of it. So, I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. From an outside perspective, it looks like they got all the right puzzle pieces, and now it's just a matter of putting them together properly. Obviously, as this was the show's first season, adjustments will be made with time. It's still finding its footing, but I think it's off to a really good start. It's got enough of what made the original series work, and enough entertaining new attributes to reel in new viewers. There is, of course, a bunch of references to 90s pop culture that I noticed, including Oz being dressed up as the little girl from the Blind Melon music video in a montage to that song No Rain. My favorite Batman movie being referred to specifically by name. Listen, if you wanted to get me invested, that's all you just had to say those two words. Batman Forever, I'm there. They even have Home Alone reenactments. I'm here for all of it. So it definitely appeals to the nostalgic part of me. Like That 70s Show, they don't rely too heavily on this aspect though, only calling enough attention to it to remind you what period this takes place in. They don't make the same mistake as That 80s Show, where they treat the decade as if it's the star of the show. That 90s Show feels true to the decade while not feeling tied down to it. On another note, the show does take some surprisingly pretty risky jokes, and it isn't afraid to just put it out there. I think more than anything else, the major thing that this show should be credited for is creating an authentic feeling sequel show. This feels like a believable follow-up to That 70s Show. The events of this series, as well as its mere existence, doesn't feel like a soulless cash grab. It feels like an actual extension of the story that we knew and loved. It's an organic follow-up that not only survives as a sequel, but makes its own identity and succeeds as its own thing. As of right now, I'm a very big fan of the show. I don't think the first season was perfect by any means, but I do think it was pretty good. It is infinitely better than the last season of That 70s Show. It's much more inspired than That 80s Show. While that's not a high bar, I think it's enough for me to see serious potential and promise in this series. I like it enough to want to see more. And if you'd like to see more of That 90s Show, and more importantly, That 70s Show content here on this channel, namely a retrospective breaking down the series season by season, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
The 90s are killing me.
With all that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.